They handed me a mimosa, smiled across fine china, and asked me to sign away my grandfather's house. The same house he left to me, by name, in his will. "Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm an architect, a preservationist, and apparently the only person in my family who reads the fine print. They said it was about family unity, but what they really wanted was control. And the moment I realized that, I stopped being the quiet one. What happened next unraveled everything we once called love and built something stronger in its place. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments, and if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. The invitation came in a pale pink envelope, nestled between a coupon booklet and a notice from the county about property tax reassessments. I nearly missed it. The return address was typed in soft gold script, Natalie Chen and Michael Daniels, with a floral watermark that bled faintly through the paper. It smelled faintly like vanilla, the artificial kind that clung to pre-packaged wedding favors. I set it on the counter without opening it. The sun was warming the hardwood floor by the time I poured my second cup of tea. Outside my apartment window, the Asheville trees had turned. Golds and ambers, a few flashes of red. Autumn always made this city feel like a painting you could walk through. My work table was covered in layers, blueprints for the old Granada Theater downtown, swatches of tile samples, a half-finished scale model I'd been tinkering with since last weekend. I liked the quiet of this life. I liked knowing exactly where I'd place things and why. It wasn't until after lunch that I peeled the envelope open with my thumbnail. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Natalie Chen and Michael Daniels." The paper was thick and expensive, edged in metallic ink. A note handwritten at the bottom in Natalie's looping script. "It would mean the world if you came." Just that. No explanations, no apologies. I left it there, half folded beside my tea mug. Later, Mel knocked on the studio door with 2 to-go cups of cider from the cafe on Charlotte Street. She let herself in like always, arms full of paint-stained tote bags and dried leaves stuck to her coat hem. "You've been holed up in here like an art goblin," she said, setting the cider down. "What's got you looking like someone just walked over your grave?" I passed her the invitation. She read it silently, her expression softening. "So, are you going?" "I don't know." "That's not a no. It's also not a yes." Mel shrugged off her coat and sat on the window ledge. "Sometimes showing up says more than staying away." I didn't answer. We sipped our cider. She changed the subject, asked about the mosaic tile order, and I was grateful for the detour. That night, I stood in the kitchen brushing out my hair while the kettle murmured toward a boil. The apartment was quiet, except for the occasional creak from the radiator and the buzz of my grandfather's old desk lamp. On the bookshelf above my sink sat a framed photo of us, me at 16, Grandpa Raymond with his arm around my shoulders, both of us standing in front of the house on Marigold Lane. He was pointing at something out of frame. I looked shy in the picture. He looked proud. "When family only calls with an agenda," he used to say, "don't answer with your heart." But what if you weren't answering with your heart? What if it was curiosity or unfinished business? The last time I saw them was Thanksgiving 2 years ago. I remember the sound of forks on china and the way Eric passed the stuffing tray without meeting my eyes. Natalie had sat across from me, smiling too brightly, talking about wedding venues as if I weren't the only sibling not consulted. When I'd mentioned the preservation grant I'd won for the Asheville district, Gregory had said, "Ah, volunteer work. That's nice." No one corrected him. I left early that night. No one noticed. But now, Natalie was asking me to come back. Not the whole family, just her. Maybe that mattered. Maybe it didn't. I wasn't sure yet. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed against the dark. I searched flights from AVL to Charlotte, fingers hesitating above the keyboard. The prices weren't terrible, but they weren't nothing either. I hovered over the cheapest option, Hand paused on the mouse pad like a held breath. Then I booked it. Straight through. Non-refundable. I left the laptop open on the couch and walked to the kitchen. The invitation was still there, its gold lettering catching the lamplight. I pinned it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a miniature hammer, a souvenir from a preservation conference in D.C. "Let's see what this is really about," I said to no one in particular. Outside, the wind carried the sound of dry leaves scraping the sidewalk. The city was getting ready for winter, and so, it seemed, was I. The rental car turned onto Marigold Lane just as the sky began to dim. Hickory looked the same in that unnerving way small towns do, frozen in a version of itself that hadn't quite caught up with reality. The pine trees lining the street were taller than I remembered, but the mailboxes, the cracked sidewalks, the hush that settled over everything as night approached, they were exactly as I'd left them. The Chen house came into view, its wraparound porch lined with cream-colored hydrangeas, the kind florists charge extra for when the word wedding is involved. A white satin ribbon had been tied around the mailbox post, and a wooden sign by the driveway read, "The big day approaches." I parked by the hedge and turned off the ignition. For a moment, I just sat there, gripping the wheel. My reflection stared back from the rearview mirror, older, sharper. I looked like someone who had built a life elsewhere. The front door swung open before I could knock. Natalie rushed out in a blush-colored robe and slippers, her hair pinned up with tiny pearls. "Lauren!" she breathed, flinging her arms around me. I stiffened for a second, then let my arms wrap around her out of habit more than instinct. "You made it." I did. She pulled back, studying my face like she wasn't sure I was real. "I've missed you." I didn't say anything. Inside, the house smelled like lemon polish and catered food. Someone had replaced the foyer rug with white runner fabric, and the staircase railing was draped in eucalyptus garland. Natalie led me upstairs. "We put you in the guest room since the workout stuff took over your old space." I blinked. "The workout stuff?" She hesitated at the door. Dad turned it into a home gym. You know, during the pandemic. The guest room smelled like linen spray and dust. The bed was neatly made, a white bathrobe folded at the foot. I set my suitcase down carefully, avoiding the edge of the decorative pillow. Natalie hovered in the doorway. "Let me know if you need anything. Rehearsal dinner's at 6. Don't be late. Dad's in full itinerary mode." I gave her a small nod. "Sure." She left and I sank onto the edge of the bed. The room was quiet, too quiet. I texted Mel. "Here, everything feels staged." She replied almost instantly. "Of course it does. Breathe. Don't let them rearrange your insides." Downstairs, the rehearsal dinner was already in swing by the time I entered. Gregory spotted me first. "Lauren," he said with a practiced smile, "glad you could make the time." He kissed me lightly on the cheek, then took a step back. "There'll be a few things we'll need to go over this weekend, just small formalities." My stomach nodded. Small formalities? In his voice usually meant legal obligations with a smile. Eric appeared at my side with 2 glasses of wine, offering one like it was a peace treaty. "How's the old house holding up?" he asked. "Fine," I replied. "Still a lot of maintenance for a place that size," he said, swirling his drink. "Those taxes alone. I mean, it's a legacy property. Costs tend to creep up." I sipped my wine and said nothing. Natalie was at the head of the table, hands folded in her lap. Michael sat beside her, talking to his groomsmen. She glanced my way once, but didn't hold the look. Halfway through dinner, the doorbell rang. Gregory excused himself, then returned with Arthur Whitman in tow. "Well," Gregory announced, "look who dropped by." Arthur carried a leather briefcase and wore the kind of smile lawyers keep in their pockets until they need them. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said, already pulling out a chair. "No interruption," Gregory replied. "Always good to see you." Eric clinked his fork against his glass. "Let's toast, yeah?" "To Natalie and Michael, and to the future of our family." Natalie stood slowly, glass trembling in her hand. Thank you all for being here, she said. Her voice was thin. It means more than I can say. She didn't look at me once. After dessert, I stepped out onto the porch for air. The crickets had started up, and the porch swing creaked slightly in the breeze. Natalie joined me a few minutes later, arms wrapped around herself. Her robe was gone, replaced by a dress that looked too formal for the setting. I was going to call you last month, she said, not looking at me. I wasn't sure if you'd pick up. Did they tell you to invite me? She flinched. I just wanted you here. That's not what I asked. She looked down at the floorboards. I didn't ask too many questions. That I believed. Inside, someone was pouring coffee. I heard Eric's laugh float through the screen. Gregory's voice followed. Let's go over the deed before brunch tomorrow. Natalie's shoulders tensed. I turned to her. You know what this is really about? She nodded once. I'm sorry. Sorry, but still part of it. I didn't say another word. I stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind me. The garden was staged like a magazine spread. Pale green tablecloths, tiny bud vases holding a single white rose each, cloth napkins folded into swans. Sunlight filtered through the maple trees in soft stripes, casting gold across everything. It should have felt warm, idyllic. Instead, it felt like being seated in the center of a play I hadn't agreed to audition for. I sat across from Natalie, who had chosen a pale blue sundress and a forced smile. Her eyes didn't meet mine once. To her right, Eric poured mimosas with the confidence of someone who believed the day was already won. Gregory stood at the head of the table, still in a pressed linen blazer despite the rising heat. I want to thank everyone for making this weekend so memorable, he said, glass raised. Family is the most important legacy we leave behind, and I think Grandpa Raymond would have been proud to see us here, continuing that legacy, together. Arthur Whitman, ever the professional, sat near the end of the table with his briefcase discreetly propped against his chair. He nodded politely at Gregory's words, but didn't raise his glass. My phone buzzed once in my lap. A text from Mel. You okay? I didn't answer. Eric cleared his throat. Speaking of legacy, Dad and I were talking yesterday about the house on Marigold Lane. He smiled like this was a perfectly normal brunch topic. Beautiful place, obviously, but old homes like that come with challenges. Upkeep, taxes, zoning, Gregory interjected. Which is why we've been thinking proactively. Arthur reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. He placed it next to my plate with a careful slide, as if setting down a dessert menu. This, Eric said, tapping the folder, is a temporary consolidation agreement. You'd still technically own the house, but the deed would shift, temporarily, into a holding structure with Natalie and me for administrative purposes. I didn't touch the folder. We're not trying to take anything from you, Gregory added quickly. It's just a formality, a way to protect the asset, streamline decisions, keep things in the family. I glanced at Natalie. She was twisting her napkin in her lap, knuckles pale. Eric leaned forward. You still keep the heart of it. This just lets us manage the legal stuff more efficiently. I opened the folder with deliberate slowness. The first few pages were filled with legalese, provisional transfer, estate synergy, revocable in nature. Language meant to sound cooperative and neutral, but I'd spent enough time around contracts and preservation work to know what wasn't being said. Hidden in the clauses was control. Once signed, the deed would no longer be solely mine. Decisions about renovation, tenants, or, even worse, sale, could be made without my approval. I closed the folder. You knew, didn't you? I said quietly, looking at Natalie. She blinked, and I saw it. The shimmer of tears she hadn't let fall. Her voice was almost a whisper. I didn't ask enough to know. Gregory cleared his throat, the veneer of patience wearing thin. This really would be best for everyone, Lauren. For who? I asked. No one spoke. The table sat still for a long moment. The only sound was the soft tinkle of cutlery being set down, the breeze rustling the trees overhead. I stood slowly. Thank you for the brunch, I said, voice calm. "Everything looks beautiful." Then I turned and walked back into the house. Upstairs, the guest room felt too clean, too foreign. I passed it and opened the door to what used to be my bedroom. Now a gym, gray carpet, a weight bench, a stationary bike, a blank wall where my corkboard used to hang. I sat on the bench, the folder still in my hands. It rested on my knees like a stone. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened, eyes stung. I bit my lip and closed them hard until the feeling passed. Then I pulled out my phone and typed one message. "Tomorrow. Bring Clara. Don't let them touch the paperwork." I hit send and looked out the window. Outside, Natalie was still seated at the table, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. They had set the stage with soft music and crystal glasses, but they had forgotten one thing. I had learned how to read blueprints. And this brunch, this was just another structure, shiny on the surface, hollow underneath. The chairs were already filled when I stepped into the garden. The table was shorter this time, round instead of long, but no less curated. Fresh lilies, white porcelain, a second stack of legal folders already waiting at my place setting. I paused at the edge of the patio, letting the sound of my heels mark the last few steps of arrival. Everyone looked up, but no one stood. Gregory's expression was one of polite anticipation. Eric offered a smile, strained and small. Natalie barely looked at me. Arthur adjusted his cuffs. I took my seat in silence. A breeze stirred the linen napkins. Gregory cleared his throat, lifting a glass of water as if starting a board meeting. "I know yesterday's conversation left things incomplete," he began, tone syrupy but clipped. "And I appreciate your time today, Lauren. These are complicated matters. Timing, structure, long-term vision. Your grandfather built something substantial. We'd like to see it remain that way." Eric slid the folder toward me again. "We can still do this the easy way." I didn't touch it. Instead, I reached into my own bag and placed a folder of my own on the table. "Actually," I said, "we're going to do this the right way." From the back entrance of the house, Clara appeared, heels soft on the stone. Her slate gray suit was crisp, a slim portfolio in hand. Reed followed behind her in plain clothes, no badge showing, but the weight of the state was present in his quiet walk. Gregory straightened. "Lauren, what is this?" Clara stepped forward. "Good morning. I'm Clara Warren, representing Ms. Chen. I'd like to clarify a few points regarding the estate and trust provisions left by the late Raymond Chen." Arthur began to rise. "This isn't necessary. We're merely having an internal family discussion." Clara didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The trust includes multiple anti-coercion clauses. Any attempt to manipulate the beneficiary into relinquishing control constitutes a breach, legally and ethically. Gregory opened his mouth, then closed it. Reed reached into his jacket and placed 3 sealed documents onto the table. "State-issued subpoenas, one for each of you, pending investigation into asset misrepresentation and estate fraud." Eric laughed under his breath, more disbelief than humor. "This is a misunderstanding." Clara turned toward him. "So is tax fraud, until it isn't." Arthur shifted in his seat. His hand hovered above his folder, then dropped to his lap. I watched Gregory's jaw tighten. His usual composure wavered for a breath before returning, thinner this time. "Lauren, you don't understand what you're doing. This is your family." "No," I said quietly. "This is your pattern." Natalie's hands were clenched in her lap, her eyes fixed on the center of the table. She hadn't spoken once. I turned to her. "You don't have to say anything," I told her, "but you do have to live with what you didn't say." Her lip trembled. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could catch it. She didn't cry loudly, no shaking shoulders or dramatic sobs, just quiet surrender. She wiped her face with the edge of her sleeve and looked down. Gregory reached for his glass but didn't drink. Eric leaned back in his chair, his foot tapping under the table, faster and faster. Arthur looked anywhere but at me. Clara continued calmly. As of now, the trust remains intact. Any attempt to transfer ownership without full, transparent consent will be considered null. Further legal action is pending." Reed folded his hands in front of him. "So until this is resolved, the house is legally frozen. We recommend no further discussion." The garden was silent except for the chirp of a bird somewhere above. The stillness was louder than any accusation. I pushed back my chair slowly. No one tried to stop me. Inside, the house was colder. Or maybe I was just finally noticing it. I walked past the hallway where my childhood photos used to hang. Most were gone now, replaced by generic framed prints, watercolor landscapes, stock art of magnolias. I paused at the stairs, glancing once at the dining room behind me. Through the open door, I could see Natalie still seated, shoulders tight, staring at the table as if something might change if she waited long enough. Maybe I should have felt triumphant. Maybe a part of me did. But mostly I felt tired. Not defeated, just finished with pretending. In the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled. My hands were steady. I didn't cry this time. I didn't need to. They had expected compliance wrapped in politeness. What they got was the truth, delivered in measured silence and iron-backed calm. Grandpa had once told me, "Never raise your voice when the truth can do the heavy lifting." Today, it had lifted the entire facade off its hinges. 2 weeks passed without a word from Gregory. That silence used to frighten me. Now it felt like proof the ground had shifted, the kind of quiet that follows an earthquake. Not peace exactly, but the absence of further breaking. I sat in Clara's office in Asheville, the late morning sun slanting through the blinds, cutting clean lines across the folders spread on her desk. She wore her usual composed expression, tapping the corner of a printed brief. The states formally acknowledged the trust structure. Reed submitted his findings on Friday. Eric used the Marigold property as collateral for a business loan 3 months ago. I exhaled, the air tight in my chest, without my consent. Clara nodded. "Without your knowledge, even, which is worse, legally." I picked up one of the documents and ran my fingers along the edge. The paper was smooth, too smooth, like it didn't want to hold weight. Do they even understand what they almost did? They understand now. She slid another folder toward me. "The preservation paperwork is ready. Once you sign, the house will be placed under permanent trust protections. No one, not even you, can sell, borrow against, or repurpose it." I stared at the page with Grandpa's name already listed as the trust's namesake. "This is what he wanted," I said. "Not just for the house, but for it to stop being a bargaining chip." Outside, someone was mowing a lawn nearby. The hum rose and fell like an old memory trying to surface. Back home that evening, I found an envelope wedged under my studio door. No return address. The handwriting on the front was familiar. I opened it slowly. "Lauren, I don't expect you to believe me, but I didn't know how deep it went. I didn't ask. I let them speak for me. I thought if I kept smiling, it would all work out. I didn't know how to stop them. And I didn't stop myself. I'm sorry. Love, Natalie." The ink had bled slightly in places, smudged where her hand must have trembled. I stood for a long moment just holding it. I remembered a winter afternoon when we were little. Natalie and I building a blanket fort in the living room. Grandpa Raymond had joined us inside, pretending the ceiling was made of clouds and the floor of lava. Natalie had made him a paper crown. He wore it the rest of the evening, even when we had dinner. He'd looked ridiculous and completely proud. Sometimes, when you grow up in a house full of performance, the moments that feel the most real are the ones where everyone forgets the script. I picked up a pen and a fresh sheet of paper. "Do better." That was all I wrote. I sealed the envelope and dropped it in the mailbox the next morning. Later that week, Clara confirmed everything was filed. The trust had been recorded with the state, the deed bound to a legal framework that couldn't be unraveled by convenience or sentiment. "It's officially untouchable," she said. I felt something loosen in my spine. the kind of release that only comes when you stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. The next day, an email from Asheville City Council blinked onto my screen. Your historic preservation grant has been approved. Ready to begin Phase 1. Please confirm availability for Planning Committee kickoff. I stared at it for a full minute before smiling. The project would convert an abandoned train depot near downtown into a mixed-use community space. Art studios, low-cost retail, a heritage archive. When I first pitched the concept, I wasn't sure they'd take it seriously. I wasn't sure I took myself seriously. But now, with the house protected, with the storm behind me, I could finally say yes without hesitation. I clicked reply, available, and ready. Later that evening, I sat on the porch of my apartment with Mel, 2 mugs of peppermint tea resting on the railing between us. "So," she said, sipping slowly, "are we going to pretend you didn't just win both a legal and moral victory, or do I get to gloat on your behalf?" I chuckled softly. "You're allowed one gloat. After that, we go back to talking tile samples." She clinked her mug against mine. "Deal." The sky was turning violet. A few stars blinked awake, tentative but steady. I glanced toward the horizon, picturing the house in hickory. Still standing, still waiting. Not a burden now, not a prize. Just a piece of history, finally allowed to rest in peace. Some things don't have to be owned to be protected. Sometimes the truest form of love is locking the door behind you and handing the key to no one. The spring light poured through the tall windows of the studio, catching dust motes mid-air and laying stripes of gold across the floor. Asheville had turned green again, lush and humming, with the scent of blooming dogwoods drifting in from the alley. I stood beside the old drafting table, watching a group of high school students sketch the curvature of the brass railings at the restored depot. "What do you see?" I asked. A girl near the front adjusted her glasses. "It's not perfect. One of the seams is crooked." I smiled. "Good. That's what makes it honest. Restoration doesn't mean erasing age. It means respecting what survived." Behind me, the sound of pencils scratching grew steady. They were seeing what I saw now, not just buildings, but stories. Weathered ones. Complex ones. Back in my office, the framed letter from Natalie sat propped near the window. Her handwriting had softened since the first note. "I'm in Missoula now, taking preservation courses. I don't know where it's heading, but I want to learn how to protect things instead of pretend they're fine. Maybe that's a start." It was. Mel leaned in the doorway, holding 2 plastic cups of iced coffee. "You sounded very professorial out there," she said. "Next thing I know, you'll be giving TED Talks." "I only have one speech," I replied. "Preserve what matters, demolish what doesn't." We sat out on the fire escape, feet dangling. The bricks around us were warm from the sun, the metal railing slightly creaky when we leaned back. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, and meant it. "I'm not finished, but I'm steady." She raised her cup. "To steady." "To second drafts," I replied. Later that week, I unlocked the new project room for the first time. The city council grant had come through, and the space was finally ours. Exposed beams lined the ceiling. One wall was covered in pinboards, maps, notes, early sketches. But the light, flooded every corner. I stood there a while, hand on the doorknob, letting the quiet settle. Jordan, my new intern, peeked in behind me. "So, is it true you used to own a house with stained glass windows and secret staircases?" I smiled. "The house is still there." "Do you think it'll ever open for public tours?" I looked over at her. "Only if they're ready to hear the whole story." She nodded like she understood more than her years gave her credit for. That weekend, I drove to Hickory one last time. The house sat at the end of Marigold Lane, unchanged but no longer unclaimed. No cars in the driveway, no voices echoing from the porch, just the wind in the trees and the low hum of spring insects waking up. I stepped out, walked to the front window, and placed a bundle of lilacs on the sill. A small brass plaque had been affixed beside the door. The Raymond Chen House, a home remembered. I didn't stay long. When I returned to Asheville, the studio buzzed with energy. Jordan was rearranging supply bins. Mel had left a sticky note that read, "Dinner after 5. You're not allowed to say no." Then a knock. I looked up. Jordan stood at the doorway, hesitant but hopeful. "Are you still taking interns this summer?" she asked. I folded the blueprint in my hands and smiled. Let's build something worth keeping. The studio was quiet when I turned off the lights that evening, but something inside me had clicked on for good. I used to believe healing came from keeping the peace. Now I know it comes from honoring the truth. Sometimes, preserving what matters means saying no with grace. And sometimes, the greatest restoration isn't of wood or stone, but of boundaries, trust, and the person you've quietly become. In families, love and accountability should never be strangers. If this story reminded you of something you've lived through or let go of, I hope you'll share it. There's room here for stories worth keeping.